Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
KARP is so smart, and I just enjoy talking to him, and I know our listeners love to hear from him. So you know what, Joe, this is, I have to just share something with you that just is unbelievable. I know when you first went into becoming a lawyer, and I know you were a different kind of a lawyer first, and then you went into elder law. Could you have ever imagined how necessary an elder law attorney is in this day and age with all the kids and the parents and what's going on in their lives together?
When I first went into law, elder law did not exist. That was not even a concept or a title. And in fact, when I first started practicing elder law, and the yellow pages came around to me to do my listings, I said, well, I'd like it under the subheading of elder law. And they said, what's that? We don't have such a subheading. They didn't even know that it existed. And they were, you remember the yellow pages, everybody?
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
They were the marketing gurus. They could come up with anything to put a headline on top of it so you'd spend more lineage. They didn't even have it. So this was so removed and remote. And the reality is that when I figured it out and I said, you know, what happens when people die is important, but what happens when people don't die is more important. And it was interesting. I was listening on the phone to the radio, and I heard something in the overhead overview of Dr. Mencia's practice, and I said, that's what we do. Now, what I thought was interesting that they say they do that listening. So I had been listening to people, and the people weren't saying, what happens when I die? I don't think they had the foresight to anticipate people living into their, not everybody was as smart as you and Bill writing a book about your living to be 100, but most people, when they came in to see me initially, they didn't think they'd live into their 80s and 90s. They figured, they'll go somewhere in their mid-70s, but they were still concerned about long-term disability. They didn't perceive it the way we now have it because medical care has been a blessing and a curse with regard to that because it prolongs life significantly, and depending on your perspective, sometimes it prolongs a very poor quality of life, etc., and that's people's choices. But nobody anticipated this much.
Well, I'm going to just, I hope I get this right, but I was listening to a show yesterday. It was very intellectual, and it was about the Chinese are considering doing something like a scale of, it's almost like we have let's say, let me figure out how to say this. Our financial credit, we know if we're a 600, 700, 800, whatever we are. Well, they're now going to do some sort of a scale, and it depends how you are as a citizen. And some things came up is how often do you see your parents? How often do you take care of your parents? And they will be watching that, and then if you don't measure up, they won't give you some of the points that get you the best seats or go here or do that. I mean, it's really an unusual situation because I think that's the big problem. I'm bringing it back now to what we do. The big problem, kids don't really think about their parents the way you and I have always thought about our parents. They could go weeks without talking to one another. They could go months. They live across the country. They don't think about spending lots of money on their gorgeous cars, but do they spend the money to fly down and see their parents? What is going on?
Well, it depends upon the kids and the generation. I mean, that's a separate and unique special issue because I deal with that when we do estate planning. I had somebody saying to me yesterday, he said, well, when Trump eliminates the estate tax so his kids won't pay any, how are you guys going to make a living? And I said, estate taxes have been out of the picture realistically since 2011. Only 4,000 people paid estate tax last year, and none of them were my clients. I said, what's keeping me going is dysfunctionality of families. Everybody's family's got issues, and we had a serious conversation about it. And one is the fault of the parents themselves. We have so indulged our children and had them feel so entitled that they don't have to do anything to get. I had a client's son. After the client died, he left. He had two sons. One was married and had two children, and one was single. And he decided he was going to leave. And this gentleman was 90 when he died, and his sons were in their 60s, and the granddaughters were in their 30s. And he left 45% to each son and 5% to each granddaughter from the one son. The single son came into the office, and he said to me, why did my father leave some of my inheritance to my brother's children?
You're kidding.
No, that is an exact quote. And I said, because it was not your inheritance. The question is, why did your father leave money to people that he wanted to leave it to? And I said to him, frankly, if he had heard what you had just said, you would have gotten far less.
That's good.
But this guy.
How do you keep a straight face, Joe, when these things are happening to you?
He was sometimes I really don't. Sometimes I speak my mind.
Good.
I literally said in one meeting where I had two daughters there with their mother. They were two sisters, and they were fighting. I'll tell you two great stories because it's really true. And people out there who are parents with kids, let me tell you, this stuff really happens. And I had two sisters there with their mother when they were discussing the mother's estate plan. She wanted them in after I'd keep the kids out. And she said, no, at this point, I want them to hear what I'm doing. And finally, these two women, who were both in their mid-50s, were bickering so badly, I said, over what they were getting, I said, you know, at least vultures have the courtesy for the carcass to be dead before they stop picking at it.
You said that in front of the mother and everything?
Yep.
Oh, my God.
Before they start picking at it, they wait for the carcass to be dead. Why don't you two stop? And I said to the mother, why don't you let them leave? She said, no, because I want this aired out now, because if it doesn't, that's when two lawyers are going to be hired for. She was a smart lady. She said, that's when they'll be hiring lawyers to sue each other. I want this done now.
Wow.
So she was a smart lady. She got it. And literally, I mean, they were literally fighting over stuff because the money was 50-50. And, so there's a sense of entitlement. There's a sense that the parents have given the children. I mean, the parents have said, oh, don't worry about us. And they keep the kids in the dark a lot, too. The number of people who come into me, and that particularly if they're not my existing clients, and they'll show me their estate planning documents, and I'll ask the obvious questions, especially if they are, they're older and older. And I say, now, do your kids know who's in charge of your health care decisions if you or your spouse can't make it? Well, we've got these papers. I said, well, what the hell happens if you're in a car accident and you're incapacitated? They don't even know who to go to. They don't know who's got authority. They don't have the paperwork. Start letting them know. That's part of the parents' fault even today. If you're 80-year-old and you've got a 55-year-old daughter and a 57-year-old son, do they know what's going on? If you don't want to share every penny of your money with them, that's fine. But you ought to let them know, here's a piece of paper that says you're in charge of my medical decisions, or this is who is, and it ain't you because you still haven't grown up. Okay? But I'm serious. And I give them ways to couch it that's much nicer than that. I mean, I'll say, you wouldn't have the heart to pull the plug on me. I don't want to burden you with that responsibility. I don't want you to be, I know that you're too sensitive and too soft. I don't want you to have to live with that. When it really means you're a goddamn idiot and you'll never show up and you won't talk to my doctors and you haven't been there for me.
Oh, my.
When I had my open heart surgery, you called your mother once and said, "How's Dad doing?" And she said, "Well, we'll see." And that's the last time you called, you know. So we try to get it to be couched nicely.
Wow.
So that, you know, we know how busy you are. We don't want to burden you. But these conversations have to be had. And people aren't having these conversations, partially because even though they'll come into me and do their estate plan, do their documents, either they don't want to discuss dying with their kids or getting sick with their kids, or their kids say, "Oh, don't worry about it," because either they don't want to deal with reality or they don't want to deal with, "Don't bother me with this crap. When it hits the fan, I'll deal with it."
So, Joe, is it possible that we should maybe write out, maybe you don't want to give it to your kids right now, but should you maybe have something all written out in an envelope that tells them all this ahead of time?
Well, no. Certain things they should know. One, they should, if they're involved, they should know who's going to make your medical decisions. Just very simple.
Sure.
I mean, the person who's going to make your medical decisions should know. I mean, I had one woman in this week whose sister lives near her and is making her medical decisions and not her kids. And that's fine. But her kids have no idea. And if they get a call, your mother was in an accident, they wouldn't know who's in charge, who has what authority. Nobody's had that discussion. Her sister knows, but, you know, you really should let them know certain things. You don't have to give them all of the minutia. You can say, here's all where the information is, but here's a copy of the healthcare document, and let me tell you where I feel about the right to die or not. This is where I want to come from, because I've named you as the one making the decision, and I'm going to let your sister and brother know that I feel very strongly about my either that I don't want any, I don't want procedures to try to keep me alive at this point in my life, or yes, I do fight until, as long as there's life, there's hope. So there's no familial disagreements, even though you name a decider. So you should certainly tell people who's got responsibility. Healthcare, they should have copies of documents so that they can substantiate it. The other stuff, if you want to say, here's where I have secured the documents that you are handling my finances if I'm dead or disabled, then do that. And the other thing people should do, and I have this with my clients, because years ago I didn't have them sign this, and I've had them sign it now for the last 10 years. Who can I delegate your confidential information to? And they say nobody. I say, okay, you've named your daughter in charge of everything. So if you're in a car crash and she calls me up and say, I'm in charge of, I found my mother's documents. Can I handle paying her bills? What does she have, etc.? I can't tell her. I said, I'm not calling anybody up, but we really have to have waivers of confidentiality so I know who I can talk to, because we have privileged communication. And they go, oh, okay, yeah, if my daughter calls, you can tell her. Or you can tell all of my kids anything. There are no secrets. And by the way, that is not to paint all families in a bad light. You don't need, all you need is a couple of percentages of families and a couple of people who are problematic and issues. And then you complicate it if you have, if you will, the good kid, the bad kid. And I don't mean the bad, but the child who ignores all of the sibling rivalry issues, the one who thinks they should be in charge even though they have done nothing for the last 22 years, and all of a sudden they want to commandeer and take over. So these things should be told. So this is who's in charge. And I always tell them, number one, in giving responsibilities, especially while you're alive, it's best if it's one at a time, because coordination is difficult. It's difficult in a marriage where you live together, right? just coordinating making decisions, coordinating it, no less making them. So if you have a daughter in New Jersey and a son in California, they're in different time zones, different lifestyles. They can't sit and chat out what to do next always. It's just not convenient. The other thing is blame the lawyer. The lawyer said it's always best if I name one. And the other thing is remind them in terms of responsibilities, that has nothing to do with inheritances. That has to do with the job. Who's going to have to do the work? So I always say to people, you know what? If I were your kid and you gave my brother all of the work and gave me half of the money, I'd be a pig in a poke.
Right.
I do nothing, he does the work, and I get half the money. Good deal.
Right. That's interesting. Joe, before we get too far, do we have the dates for our seminars in January?
I do.
Why don't you do that? Because I don't have it. I don't have it.
First of all, what I want to tell people is our senior survival workshops, we do them. We used to do them every month, and then sometimes we used to do more than once a month. But we have honed down on them. And in the month of January, in fact, we're not even doing Port St. Lucie because we couldn't get a good date. We are doing it in Palm Beach Gardens on January 18th, and I'll tell everybody again, 2017, and in Boynton Beach on Thursday, January 19th. Both of them are at 1:30, and you'll get the information. It's on our website. We'll remind you again, but put it on your calendars because it's important to deal with these issues. And we're going to be talking about some of the changes we expect in the law because we know certain things that have been said that we can anticipate. One thing I will shout out is if anybody is interested in getting governmental benefits, Medicaid down the road or VA benefits, based upon everything we have been told, that's going to get harder, not easier. We have a party in power does not believe in that.
Oh boy!
They believe in corporate welfare, not working class welfare.
Yep.
And
amazing.
That's a comment, not even a. That's an observation, and they would tell you that. They believe corporate welfare creates jobs. So that's the reality. So don't sit around and scratch your tuchus and say when it happens, it happens. There'll still probably be ways, because there'll be good opportunities still for crisis planning, but crisis planning sucks. It's the second best way. Long-term planning matters, so people should start to address those issues and get on top of it. Just like the people who try to go to Home Depot and Publix, when they tell us the hurricane is tomorrow, they find that it's harder to get boards, flashlights, batteries, and water. And the people who bought their batteries, water, lumber in July sat very comfortably when they said a hurricane is coming.
That's good advice, so, Joe. Really good advice.
A storm is potentially coming. No, if this election taught us anything, nobody knows anything that's going to really happen. Okay? And that means also in your personal life. Everybody is in denial, but I can tell you, I don't have one client who's in a nursing home who thought that's where they would end up.
That's interesting, isn't it? That has happened. That's like long-term health care. When I told people that they ought to be getting long-term health care insurance, they just laughed at me. I don't want to go to a nursing home. I don't need this. I don't need that. Yeah, right.
Well, the answer also is if you have good long-term care insurance, today, unlike days of old, that insurance covers home care and assisted living. And that may be the only way you do stay home is because you've got that insurance. And today there are more products available, and people should make themselves aware of the different type of products and policies.
You've certainly been on a learning curve, haven't you, when you first started this, and what's happened. But the thing I've admired about you is, boy, you have stayed on the education of everything. You are really like an encyclopedia, and I don't know who does this. Do you go to seminars? How do you know all the things that you know?
It's an accumulation of knowledge. I mean, you do this long enough, and that's one of the things when people come to our firm. You know, you'll see sometimes a firm that'll have 6 lawyers, and it'll say 25 years of experience, and all of them have 4 years.
Right.
The answer is, I've been doing this for this only straight solid since 1994. I dabbled in it before, but this is what we've been doing since 1994. I have now 5 other lawyers in my firm. 3 of them have been with me more than 10 years. One of them's only been with me 2 months, but he's been also with me 31 years, and that's my son Jonathan, because he just graduated law school and passed the bar.
Isn't that wonderful?
But we have all of these, so we have legitimately well over 50 years of experience amongst us, and we go to seminars, we read stuff, we're on listservs, we know people that we talk to, and we bounce and we dance, and we've seen what's happened in the past. And from history, we can learn. So from history, we can learn. So we've seen what's happened in the past. And somebody said to me, oh, you guys are really in economic trouble. Lawyers are going to be, Trump will eliminate estate taxes and he'll eliminate Medicaid. And the answer is, no, we won't be in trouble because we're already anticipating those changes, and we still know people are going to need help. And now we are going to be able to be there because we're staying on top. We're studying this stuff. We're anticipating what will happen. And somebody who might have said, oh, I'm going to try this, is just going to drop out. When the tax laws changed, everybody who ever wrote a will said they practice elder law. As soon as they make it harder, where experience and knowledge and creativity, because you get it over the years, really helps, a lot of these people are going to just be scaling down their practices because they don't have it. So we stay on top of it every number of ways. And candidly, I keep my wheels turning, figuring out what to do and how to do it.
That's
and we
great.
work as a team, and that really does work.
Well, Joe, I have to just say that going back to when you first started the show, excuse me, there are so many fights, as you were talking about, people who you didn't think there was a problem, and all of a sudden I can be walking my dog and I'll say to someone, oh, how you doing? Oh, I'm having a terrible time. My mother's this, and my brother won't let me do this, and I can't get this. And from nowhere, they're not sleeping at night because they can't figure out what to do. I've recommended you to so many people. It just seems like it's becoming it's just anytime you have parents that there's a problem.
And there's a problem, and sometimes the lawyers don't think. I had a gentleman come into my office yesterday. He said his wife blew his entire estate plan by dying too soon, which was cute. But he wanted me to change his trust because his wife's been dead 4 years. His kids have limited contact with him, and he wants to make his caregiver, a home health worker, who may be the nicest and most his beneficiary of his entire trust.
You're kidding.
No. And know what I said to him?
Oh, my God.
I said, I appreciate that all of the legitimacy of what you're saying, but my firm policy is we will not do that. Yeah, I would only do it if I had significant proof and your children agreed and a psychiatrist said there was no undue influence, etc. He said, I'll find another lawyer to do this.
Good, let him, right?
And I said, I'm sorry to say that you probably will have no difficulty, but our firm policy is we will not let the home health care worker become your beneficiary. We will not let the home health care worker become your power of attorney with our assistance.
Good for you, Joe.
And I understand that there are unfortunately legitimate circumstances. And by the way, I see my nephew David is listening this morning in Georgia. He puts us on Facebook to listen to
great.
us. And by the way, if people go to our website, karplaw.com, they can look up a bunch of stuff. And I believe our e-newsletter now printed up has all of our last recordings available, too.
Yep, that's right. They should, because we do have you on YouTube. But I will tell you this, that before we end, there are people that have no more family members. They have nobody to leave money to, and the caregivers do wind up getting and inheriting that, and that's different.
Yeah, that is different. And by the way, some of those people, and I have them now sign a disclaimer, ask me to be their trustee or ask me to be their personal representative power of attorney. Now, I'm a last resort, and I make them sign a paper that says, hey, I didn't have to use this guy.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it right now for a lady whose son she hasn't had communication with in 30 years, and her husband's with minor communication, and her husband's in a nursing home. And she said, and she hired me to start doing it, and I helped her before she died, so she knew what we were charging and everything, because you got to understand, lawyers ain't free.
Hey, that's it. And the radio's not free, and we have to get out of here. So thank you, Joe.
Have a good...
You too.
Everybody have a nice holiday.
Thank you, Joe.
Happy New Year, I think.
Thank you.
2017. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.